and we went out to dinner. Ralph
Okay,
Abraham was
good
there, too.
afternoon, Earth. This is Adam
And
Sturch,
there was this
broadcasting
French
from the
woman
Mushroom
there,
Mansion,
film
Taos, New
producer,
Mexico.
and she
Working
was
on
seated
oil
next to me at
painting
dinner. And
drive-in,
before
not
dinner,
drive-through.
we had been
Discontinuing
talking
with
about
this from
mushroom. I had
last
been
night.
introduced to
I
her as the
really
mushroom
enjoyed the
man,
start of this
and
one,
she
and I
said
kind of
to
want to
me,
flesh it out a bit more and set it to dry
you'll see
before I
why the
dig
story I
back
just
into
told
Medusa's
relates to
crown.
this
So I've got a
story
wide
about
variety of
your
colors on the
mushroom
palette,
that
raw
you
out of the tube. I'm going to keep this one
and she
viscous
said to me, and then she
and
said,
kind of
"He
playful
says
in
this
the line of
mushroom speaks to you, but I
Redon
don't
or
understand exactly
who's
how
the other
this
guy?
works."
Chagall,
And I
yeah,
said,
that kind of
well,
thing. So here we go.
it's sort of like it has many faces that it can show. Like sometimes it's like the role that Rod Steiger played in The Pawnbroker. And at that precise instant, Steiger shows up at the table to shake hands with everybody and slap a few backs, and then he just drifts off into the recesses of this restaurant. And Ralph Abraham, who was sitting across the table from me watching this whole thing and had heard what I said to this woman, reached across the table to me and said, "You see, the mushroom is showing us that it can touch us anywhere, anytime." Strange stories. Synchronicity. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you remember to bring back what you've learned?
Oh, that's a good question. That's an important question. That's a key question. Roland Fisher, who was a great psychedelic researcher with psilocybin and later retired to Majorca to be Robert Graves' next-door neighbor, coined the phrase state-bounded. This means you can't bring it back. And I'm sure you all have had the experience of dreaming, being caught up in some incredible dream with strange people, foreign countries, exotic costuming. The alarm goes off, and as you stagger out of bed, this is just melting like an ice cube in a blast furnace. And by the time you're out of bed and fully dressed, you have nothing, not a shred, not a hint, not a clue. It's absolutely gone. This is a state-bounded memory. Chemically, what's going on is apparently short-term memory transcription is just not occurring. You're having the immediate impression of these things happening, and then it's not going to disk, so to speak. It just is lost. Yeah?
My experience is also with dreaming is to not to be afraid that I'm losing what I'm dreaming. You know, in the moment I'm afraid that I'm not getting hold of, I know that's gone. And in training myself in knowing everything, and so I'm how do you say that? I'm tuning my body to remember everything what I'm getting. Before I'm going to bed, or I'm taking the dreams as learnings. Also, like learning during the nighttime, and it's that I'm telling my body to take everything. So even if I don't know it really consciously the next morning, it's there, and I make the experience that it's really there. Sometimes I have just a feeling, and I'm noting down the feeling. I'm trying to just feel it again, and so I'm knowing something happened, and I shifted something tonight, and it was like this and that. And I know that I did my work, also if I don't know exactly what was going on. But it helped me a lot in just knowing that my body is has so many possibilities to memorize, that will memorize. So I'm not giving ears to fear that I'm not memorizing.
And the dream is not truly lost in that situation where you wake up and it melts away. And the proof of this, and I'm sure you all have had this experience, is then you go off about your daily business. And then there will be, and it was almost always by coincidence, an image, a chance phrase, a view of a street or something, and it will cause you to remember the dream. And once you get a hook into a portion of the dream, if you then work on it, you can probably bring a lot of it out. How this works in psychedelics is if I have an insight or something that I particularly want to remember, first of all, I will say it aloud. This is strong imprinting. And then the real imprinting is to repeat it a few minutes later, and then a few minutes later again. And if you can carry it over a number of minutes to several different levels, it won't leave you.
Okay.
A very useful shortcut for this is a tape recorder, where if you play the tape of the trip back after the trip, you will, just a phrase spoken will set off a chain of associative recall, and you will retain it this way. But to my mind, this is one of what shamanic training must really be, is mnemonic training. That if you want to bring the stuff back, you have to train yourself to bring it back. Now, this state-bounded thing, it's important to notice. We talk about how dreams are state-bounded, how psychedelic experiences are state-bounded, but what we fail to notice usually is that ordinary reality is state-bounded. I mean, if I were to ask any one of you, what did you discuss with the person you had lunch with yesterday? It's probably very touch and go to actually put this together. I had lunch yesterday with Richard. We discussed his television transmission system, but that was new to me and therefore easy to retain. And also Richard and I haven't had thousands of hours of conversation together, but the person we are most familiar with is ourselves. Well, I don't know if it works for you like this, but I am, let us say, cleaning my house, vacuuming, doing dishes, making beds, and I'm thinking, all the time thinking. And I understand why Rome fell. I realize what I said wrong to somebody 2 weeks ago. I recall a telephone obligation that I have to fulfill. I think about things that happened years and years ago. And then the doorbell rings, and I go to the door, and there's someone there, and they say, "What are you doing?" And I say, "Nothing." This is because the ordinary state of consciousness is highly state-bounded. We don't... One thing these Buddhists have certainly gotten right is that attention to attention is the key to taking control of your mental life. And for most of it, it's just like a river flowing by, and every once in a while we check to see if the river is still flowing by, but we don't attempt to retain it. So memory training is great psychedelic training. And of course, as I'm sure you know, there were arts of memory in the past. We are very poor memorizers because we rely on technologies to do it for us. But people in the past had all kinds of technologies for allowing them to remember things. For instance, the most common one in use in late antiquity and up through the Renaissance was the memory palace approach. This is where you think of a place, a big place preferably, a place you know well, a school, a hospital, a cathedral, a university, but big, and sit and think about it. Think about how it looks as you go through the main doors, and then what you see when you turn to the left, and what you see when you turn to the right. Learn this building until you really can command it with reasonable vividness in most situations. Then, if you want to remember something, imagine yourself walking through the front door of this building, turning to your left, and there near the water fountain you will place an emblem of this thing you want to remember. And then you will go down the hall and around the corner, and by the fire extinguishers you will place another emblem of the next thing you want to remember. Well then, the act of remembering this long list of things is the act of mentally moving through this imaginary building that you know. And when you come to the water fountain, the clue will be there. When you pass the fire extinguishers in your mind, the emblem you placed there will be there. Now I know this sounds highly unworkable and unwieldy, but it actually is extremely workable. And people like Catullus and Cicero, the great late Roman orators, were able to speak for hours on end with lists of virtues and vices and interconnecting causes and this sort of thing, because they were masters of this mnemonic memory palace technique. Well, psychedelics are a vivid, this is another one of these things like mantras, yantras, and so forth that works on psychedelics. You can do this. And so when you're on a psychedelic and you have an experience that you want to remember, place it in your memory palace. And the next time you come past that point in your memory palace, this thing will be there. Now the other trick is, any of you who are interested in this, the last word is The Art of Memory by Frances Yates, which is a wonderful woman, great scholar of Renaissance magic. And the final trick is to make the image extremely vivid, so that, for instance, if you're about to give a speech to your collegium on the 7 deadly sins, well, then one of these sins is lust. I chose the easy one because I can't remember what the other 6 are. Shows you where my problem lies. So you don't just place the word lust in the memory keeping spot. You place some vivid and shocking image. Yeats suggests the image of a nun lifting her skirts. I think this was a classically suggested one that people were taught to use. Well then, when you come around the corner and meet the nun lifting her skirts, you think, aha, lust. That's the first, and then you go on and so forth. And books, some of the most astonishing products of the medieval engraver's art are these books of what are called emblemata. Emblemata are surreal juxtapositions of things and animal parts and bodies and machines that are memory emblems, made as grotesque, surreal, and bizarre as possible in order to make them unforgettable. That was the technique. And the surrealists used this very consciously. There is something about the unexpected, the grotesque, and the surprising that is, almost by definition, memorable. And this will work very well in a psychedelic state as well.
Yes. Your I Love Lucy, when I did a mushroom experience, and there were certain issues, certain things I went to that ceremony with on my agenda to be healed from. And one of them was to be released from some of my early Catholic conditionings that I felt were hanging me up. And when I was in the experience, they talked about los niños, the little helpers that would come. And I asked, just like Lucy, I said, I need some help. What can you help me with it? I looked at my hand, and how could you forget something like this? The fucking blood started to come out of my hand, and right in the middle of my hand, this blood came right out of the palm and started dripping. And I'm bleeding. It's like, it doesn't hurt. I'm bleeding to death here, and this isn't even hurt. Yeah, it was like the whole suffering stuff of what Catholics are conditioned with, and it came to reality with the stigmata. And I looked at my other hand, the same thing was happening, and I was going, my God, I'm feeling this crucifixion, thing, and the Saint Stephen, and my name was in the martyrdom, and all this martyrdom shit I'm subjected, on and on. You could, I could talk for another 30 minutes about how meaningful that was to me, but talk about, you want an image, you want a vision, ask the question of God to give me a vision. I'll give you one.
Oh yeah, ask him to see.
I'm going to the legal aspect of this thing. You're talking something about highly illegal. As far as the lawsuits, how do you handle it? Anybody that drives around with a DMT, do you the Maryland doctor? Obviously not.
No, I'm not paranoid about it. If they wanted me, they should have come a long time ago, because I was much more vulnerable then. I've sort of covered my ass. Naturally, if you speak about these things, you can't do anything particularly illegal. And perhaps I'm foolish in the sense that I shouldn't be worried about being arrested, I should be worried about being shot. If that's how they play the game, then I'm in big trouble, because they'll just come and shoot me, and you too if you get into this. But if we actually have a legal system that works, then this is called advocacy, and it's not a crime. It's an exercise of the First, Fourth, and I don't know, a couple of other amendments to the Constitution. Henry David Thoreau, you don't get more American than that, said that if you are right, you are a majority of one. And we live by majority rule. I don't feel heroic. I mean, it's not false modesty or anything. I don't feel heroic doing this. This is really humdrum to me. I just could not behave any other way because of what I've seen. I mean, this transcends laws. All that is it's seen as preposterous. I mean, there are, I believe in universal laws. You shouldn't kill people. You shouldn't lie to people. You shouldn't inject yourself between lovers. Most cultures, I think, recognize a set of universal laws, but thou shalt not smoke marijuana. Surely the God of Mount Sinai has better things to do than worry about that sort of thing. We have to create a new option. All social progress is made by people taking chances. If I am an anomaly, some kind of dangerous sociopath, then my message will be swamped and lost in the noise of the tumult of the world, because there are thousands of messages out there. If, on the other hand, this is a great and important domain of truth, then they are crazy to try and repress it, because it cannot be repressed. They have tried to repress it. Oh,
Drugs is so good for the psyche. Why have we repressed it?
they sought to repress it because there's something in the Western mind that is very nervous, that gets very nervous when you try to talk about the bedrock of ontology. McLuhan talked about this. He met great resistance, and all he was saying was that print had created certain kinds of unconscious biases in society in favor of uniformity, linearity, and like that. And he was amazed at the violence of the reaction against this. And he concluded that those cultures that have evolved from the phonetic alphabet are so removed from the stuff of the world, as opposed to languages like Chinese or Mayan or something like that, where there is a retention of the image in the written language, that the cultures descended from the phonetic alphabet are extremely paranoid about questions about the nature of reality. And that's what this is really about. The psychedelic issue does not relate to the drug issue at all. I mean, in fact, it's important to make this point. Drugs and psychedelics are not two members of a family. They are antithetically opposed to each other. The pro-psychedelic position is an anti-drug position. Now, how can this be, since we are accustomed to thinking of psychedelics as drugs? Well, it's like this. What is it that we object to about drugs? And I think everybody can agree, maybe not everybody, but most people can agree, we do have a drug problem. I mean, if you live in the inner cities, you see people getting all twisted up behind this stuff. We have a drug problem. So what is it about drugs that we find problematic? Well, I think that what is objectionable about drugs is that they cause unconscious, obsessive, destructive, self or other behavior. Unconscious, obsessive behavior is intolerable because we are conscious people accustomed to injecting choice and meaning into our lives. You cannot have meaning if you do not have choice. This is why we don't have to spend any time at all talking about whether the world is predestined. Because if the world is predestined, then I'm not saying what I'm saying because it's what I want to say. I'm saying what I'm saying because I can't say anything else. And you're sitting there because you can't not sit there. So it makes the world very dull and uninteresting. Compulsive, unexamined, obsessive behavior is the quintessence of anti-human behavior. It was Bertalanffy, the founder of general systems theory, who said, people are not machines. But in every situation where they're given an opportunity to behave like machines, they'll go for it. So, in that sense, the psychedelics are almost the answer to the drug problem. And the early use of psychedelics reported spectacular progress with alcoholism. Well, now see, the people who believe that alcoholism is a disease, and I don't follow this literature closely, it seems to me this is a preposterous statement. I mean, a disease? You mean like influenza and smallpox and AIDS? Alcoholism is a disease? Can you get it if you don't practice safe sex? Or do you have to wash your eating utensils? It isn't a disease. What it is it's a failure of self-image. And the reason LSD in many cases had a tremendous impact on alcoholic behavior was because it just showed people what they were doing. It said, this is you. You're a drunk. You're a burden to your family, a bore to your friends, you smell bad, and you're useless. How do you like it? And so somebody said, I don't like it. I said, well then stop drinking. And that's what it is. That's how psychedelics cure addiction. And nobody, when they talk about addiction, nobody ever talks about what is called self-restraint.
Here we go. It's incredibly, I don't remember the name offhand, incredibly controversial.
But alcoholism?
Yeah.
Heavy drinking. Myth of alcoholism is a
That's
disease.
right, yeah. And the man take the position that the last 30 to 40 years where we've seen alcoholism as a disease is just, more bullshit from the medical model. We need another alternative. Of course, AA and everybody's just up in arms about the drug.
Well, yeah, AA has
I
a...
don't remember that.
They're...
The name of the book is it's by Finnegrad. It's called Heavy Drinking: The Myth of Alcoholism as a Disease. Basically, it discusses the fact that it's a rationalization to say that it's a disease. I mean, there are certain people, I think, that have some certain chemical reactions to alcohol, but they're in the minority, and that this is very important to me as well because this is work that I'm interested in, and alcoholism has also touched my family because it has a lot of families.
Yeah, I think
See how it's
the disease
self-perpetuating.
model has there's no responsibility involved, And AA, their position, their goal is not to understand the nature of the universe. They're not in the philosophy business. They're trying to get people to stop drinking. So to maximize that goal, I think that they go far overboard. First of all substances, they say. If you're an alcoholic, then you must forswear everything. I don't know how they relate to tobacco. But see, what you've got to understand is we are set up for addiction. It's just like language and cognition and all of these other things. We are the animal which addicts. Other animals don't addict. And addiction is a way of relating to the world. We don't not only addict to drugs, we addict to each other, to chunks of territory, to behavior patterns.
Ourselves to what we see and what we
Exactly, it's attachment. We attach to everything. And it's very real, it's physiological. I remember years and years ago, a woman left me for a homunculus. And I was appalled. And it became, I was like vomiting every 4 hours, could not sleep, would burst into tears in inappropriate situations, of which there were many in my life. And heroin withdrawal cannot be worse than that. I mean, are you kidding? Vomiting every 4 hours? And then one night, in the middle of the night, I was just frantic because I felt like when I was awake, I felt like I wanted to be asleep. When I should have been sleeping, I couldn't sleep, and I was just dragging myself to classes. I felt, this is crazy. I should turn myself in, but they don't have crisis centers for broken hearts. What are you going to do? So then, in the middle of one of these bouts, I went to the medicine cabinet, and this woman who had left me had left all these pills there. And I sorted through all these pills and came upon a small bottle of tranquilizers, a very mild tranquilizer, like Valium or something. Well, I had never taken a Valium. So I said, I'll take half. And I took it, and the next morning, or a few hours later, I went out to breakfast, and somebody came up and sat at my table and said, well, how are you coping since Hermione left you? And I said, who? It really gave me respect for tranquilizers. I mean, I was appalled. I was appalled that something so real to me, so much me, half the tab, I didn't care, let him go. And then I realized all the people around me, this is how they deal with emotional crisis. Nobody wants to feel anything. I mean, at the moment that an unpleasant emotion rears its head, people go take Valium or something else and cut themselves off from feeling. We addict to people, that's the point of that story, and when they leave us suddenly, it's just like having your heroin taken away and you become a mad thing for months, years sometimes. I mean, I still vibrate from this event, and it was 15 years ago. We addict to territory. This is war, our turf, our land. Now this arises
All right, that takes us down to the last minute in this memory clip. So I think I'm going to pause it, take a break, and look at the colors and see what else I can do to this on this session. So take two coming up. All right, take two, more colors.
That's what happens when I stop smoking cannabis. And yet I'm supposed to be breaking out into cold sweats, wandering aimlessly through the streets of the city, staring up at lighted windows. Yeah, right. So I think we give each other too much permission to be weak in this area. What is never talked about in talk about addiction is self-restraint. I mean, for heaven's sake, just take hold of yourself. Yeah, responsibility. And if you tell people addiction is a disease, addiction is it's because you're black, it's because you're poor, it's because you're this, it's because you're that, you have just given them a whole bunch of reasons not to take responsibility for their own situation. And what is needed in these addictive situations, I think, is the shock of recognition. I believe, that if you don't take drugs, you're unbearable. And I can't think of a society on earth where people don't take drugs that any of us would want to have anything to do with. I mean, let's take Calvinist Geneva, say. I imagine that as an example of an environment of moral rectitude. I mean, these people did not wear bright colors, didn't listen to music, never drank coffee, never smoked, forget about alcohol, sex for procreation, so forth and so on. And they are paradigms of the male ego frozen in place, didactic, paternalistic, all-knowing, filled with hellfire and damnation. Everything is seen in terms of a moral dimension that makes impossible demands on the human animal. Rather, I think what we should realize is that somehow our evolution into a civilized, self-reflecting being is caught up in these synergistic relationships that our conscious mind has with various things in the environment, so that we should choose our addictions. Now notice that addictions, to my mind, and you can argue with this if you want by choosing extreme examples, but addictions to natural substances are harmless. Let me name some natural substances that you might disagree with me on this point. I think probably the strongest one would be, people would say, well, what about opium? Surely this is the scourge of mankind. Actually, opium was never a problem in human populations until it was conceived of as a problem by British colonial policy makers who decided that they could manipulate the opium trade to get an entree into China. Alcohol was never a problem, particularly, until the discovery of distilled alcohol. And of course, heroin is distilled opium, morphine also. Sugar is a refined vegetable substance. In every case, it has required the intercession of science and technology to take harmless habits and turn them into dangerous addictions, so that everybody has a solution to the drug problem. I think what I would suggest is something called the Vegetable Drug Act, where you just say, if it's a vegetable, it's not a drug. This was the position until very recently with British common law. In Canada, mushrooms were illegal. Mushrooms aren't psilocybin. Psilocybin is a refined chemical. If it is technology which allows us then to create these super powerful addicting substances, and there will be more and more of them downstream, you may be sure. So I think what we need to do is think of human beings as hardware, as the computer, if you will, and drugs are forms of software. And the software that you run determines the kind of functions that you can perform. If you run distilled alcohol software, well then you take on the persona of the alcoholic. I believe that cannabis is probably the most harmless and benign drug around. It carries out this feminizing that I talked about. It lowers the profile of the male ego. Instead of wanting to duke it out, people just say, well, if that's your thing, and that's what we need, I mean, that practically boils down to what we call tolerance. So I think that this disruption of our relationships to psychoactive plants is what set us on the long, hard, downward path into neurosis. And it began with agriculture, with the narrowing of our spectrum of plant awareness from many, many plants down to the rye, the oats, the barley. And it's interesting that then out of this came the cultivation of I mean, I think beer preceded wine. Beer is an older thing than wine. That comes out of the fact of having created surpluses, because the way beer was discovered was through the fermentation of grain that was stored. If you didn't have surpluses, you would never discover the psychoactive properties of fermented grain. It's very interesting. In Nepal, the Newari people have an alcoholic beverage that when it's put in front of you, it looks like a bowl of granola. It's dry. They pour it out of a sack into your cup, and you say, this is beer? And then they come along with boiling water and pour it over it, and then you get this foamy, lightly fermented, contaminated grain water. And to my mind, that clearly is then how fermentation of grains and production of alcohol was established. Notice that it was also the accumulation of surplus from the agricultural adaptation that creates the need for defense. Because now you've got a surplus. Now you have to guard your surplus from everybody who doesn't have any. The other thing that creation of surpluses caused was the invention of barter and money and this sort of thing, because now you have something that you can trade for something that you don't have. So all of these adaptations, also a nomadic people cannot move a grain surplus with them. So if your harvest one year, if you're a semi-nomadic people, that's a people who, like in the Amazon, they plant things and then they leave them and go away, and they have like a yearly peregrination, and when they come back to that place a year later, there's all this food ready for them. Well, imagine a nomadic people who were doing that kind of quasi-agriculture with cereal, and then there's 1 year of great weather and great rainfall, and when they arrive at their little wheat patch, so much wheat has been produced that they can't move it. They can't take it with them. So then they say, well, but we have food now, so we don't have to keep hunting, so let's spend the winter here. And this interruption of the cycle of nomadism to deal with unexpected surpluses obviously spawned the idea in people's minds, well, wouldn't it be great if we had surpluses every year? And then that says, well, that won't happen if we're as careless as we have been about our sowing and harvesting, but maybe if we're very careful and till the land and carefully plant and do careful weeding, we'll have to stay here and weed, but then we'll get this tremendous payback in the end. So, to my mind, the invention of agriculture broke our relationship to the wild plants and the lowered profile of the male ego, and set us on a path of defending wealth, creating fortifications, supporting more specialization, larger populations, so forth and so on. And from there to the present predicament, it's only a moment.
Hi, Mom. You're just coming to pee. Now you're going back out, huh? Is that right? So it's on that. Just come in, use the box. Get outside or anything.
That's right. And also this idea of our land, because you want to hang on to this good cereal growing land, so it's yours, you say, and then you put a wall around it and you defend it, and so forth and so on. Well, yeah.
Where do you see the goal?
Well, I think that we're now, things are very far out of hand, and we're caught up now in the end game of history, and that we are going to have to create a way out of this impasse that is probably going to mean a complete redefining of who we are and how we relate to each other, and space and time and life and death. And it appears that technology is now the thing that is guiding us forward. We are not being led into the future by politicians. Politicians are running frantically along behind the wagon of history, trying to jump onto it. What is leading us, what's pulling the cart, is technology. And I think technology is the program of realizing the practical concerns of the imagination. And that really where we are headed is the imagination. It's a place. I don't know whether it's in solid state circuitry or in the bones of the planet or in artificial arcologies in deep space. The future will figure out the details, but we are close enough to it now that we can anticipate it. It's what the shamans always said was possible. A world of value and meaning lived in the light of nature. And I think if we can get through this narrow neck that rationalism has imposed upon us and overcome these poisonous paternalistic philosophies, we will return. That's why I call it the archaic revival. It's the myth of the eternal return. History is something that you finish with as quickly as possible and then return to the archaic mode of eternity. And I think that's the adventure that we're all caught up in. That's the agenda that the plants and the planet have always had in front of them. It's just that we wandered away from an awareness of what was happening by deluding ourselves with our own inflated self-image. You know, man as master of woman and nature. And this distorted part of our self-image has now become so dangerous to us that we have to abandon it. We have to draw back from it. And under that kind of pressure, I think we will. So, harking back to another question, the reason I do this and the reason I don't feel any great trepidation about it is because I believe that historical momentum is with us. This is what is destined to come to be. We are going to take control of who we are by taking control of the physiological and psychological foundations upon which the self rests. And that means the chemical re-engineering of ourselves into the state of Edenic innocence that was lost when we set out on the long trail of the sword and the hoe, basically. That's it. End of weekend. Thank you very, very much. It's a political point of view, you see, and as a practical matter, there's no better way to succeed in politics than to champion the most out of it point of view. And now we live in an era where beige fascism is apparently the rising rule of the day. Well, that means if you want to be on the cutting edge, you have to embrace something very akin to psychedelic anarchy, the absolute antithesis of the fascist state. And then you will participate in the turning of the tide and the vindication of this point of view. And it will be vindicated, there's no doubt about it. All other points of view are bankrupt on the face of them. End of footnote.
And that might end this session as well. It's pretty saturated, and I think that's a good foundation to start building on. I like the general shapes and the kind of bounciness of the tones. So thanks for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico. working on oil painting drive-in. Looking a little Gras meets Chagall here, but that's okay. So it's quite a bit of fun. And the Uma Thurman scene on the screen will detract from that aspect of the technique. Anywho, have a good day, Earth.